Settlers of Cyandrium, Empire of the Land and Sea. Chapter 1. Amidst the calm of gentle waves, clear blue skies, and a beautiful summer haze, a ship named the Willow sailed its way into the nearby harbor of a bustling port town. It was a ship embroidered in fine gold and adorned in bedazzling ornaments. Its wooden exterior was extravagantly crafted, showing little signs of wear. The sails of the ship were pristine, blanketing the sky in a sheet of white and silver. It was a vessel that represented the pinnacle of opulence, as it was made to captivate an audience. And captivate it did, as people near and far gathered to watch its grand arrival. Once the Willow rested itself close to the docks of the town, various onlookers bunched together to gawk at the vessel's sheer majesty. Not soon after, a set of dock workers came forth to secure the Willow into place, completing their task with great haste. Once the ship was well prepared for passengers to leave its guarded embrace, an onslaught of voyagers came forth, spreading onto the docks below. All who departed took to their new surroundings with great enthusiasm, taking no rest as they flowed out into the town ahead. As passengers continued to make their way from the ship to the docks and into the town, a slim young man was seen being whisked away alongside them. He was forcefully passed along from crowd to crowd until finally settling in a secluded area that was far from where he originally started. Once on solid footing, the young man afforded himself a moment to regain his composure, and was found slumped over a nearby barrel, catching his breath. Given a better look at him, he appeared to be an orderly young man, despite his current circumstances, was well dressed, and had an attractive face that was complemented by his neatly trimmed brown hair. As he remained hunched over the barrel, that he now grew so fondly of, he seemed taken aback by the world around him. This also left him, however, seeming rather vulnerable. Thus he was pursued, thereafter, rather aggressively by a much older gentleman, who encroached upon his personal space in massive strides. This gentleman, large and rugged beyond reasonable measure, seemed poised for a fight. He was fastened in crude clothing, had a rough scruffy graying beard attached to his worn-down face, and cared very little for how much space he took up. As this gentleman advanced forward to encounter the young man, he received a look of perplexion that quickly turned to fear. The man's sudden arrival sent the young man stepping backwards, placing him at a disadvantage for the ill-fated encounter. Though instead of pursuing any physical altercation, the older gentleman chose to instead stop abruptly in his tracks just moments before contact, and instead laughed at the young man's misfortune. Still not used to the waves, Jacob, chuckled the older gentleman, seeming to relish in the young man's suffering. His voice was deep and cheerful, inviting a lot of attention from those around him. Many of those who saw him seemed shocked and disturbed by his behavior, but he paid them little mind. To double down on his efforts, the gentleman decided to slap Jacob across the back, which almost knocked him over and into the nearby water. Barely catching himself, Jacob clung to the nearby barrel he was standing by, counting his blessings that he did not fall into the water. The shock of the moment brought sudden life to him that quickly grew into anger. Annoyed by this man's actions, Jacob poised himself to retaliate, broadening his shoulders and jabbing a skinny finger into the gentleman's chest. He was seemingly ready to do something, but halted once he noticed a third figure from back in the direction of the Willow arrive upon the scene. "Leave him alone, James," hollered a third man in an exhausted voice that seemed unamused by the antics taking place in front of him. This third man, handsome and clean-shaven, seemed quite comfortable with himself and his surroundings. His charming mannerisms caught the gaze of those who passed him by, and his nonchalant attitude afforded him a guise of mysteriousness. His attire, simple yet elegant, complemented his overall demeanor, which highlighted an element of his person that shouted, vigorously self-confidence. As this third man approached the man named James, he gave him a wry smile that gave him an air of insincerity. "See, boy," spoke James, peering back at Jacob momentarily. "You should try being more like your brother Nathaniel." I'm glad at least one of you can spend time at sea and remain upright by the end of our journey." With maddened eyes, Jacob stared daggers at James, but resisted the urge to do anything too reckless with the frustration. He chose to instead straighten up once again, and willed himself to action by other means. "I wouldn't say that it was the sea that made the trip so unbearable, but instead its rotten captain, who navigates these waters like a lunatic. It is a sad day when madmen, such as yourself, are allowed to sail these seas so callously. I count myself fortunate to be able to stand on stable ground, and wish to never go through such horrors ever again." James turned to Jacob, seeming stirred by what the young man had to say. He peered over at the young man with a hardened glare, and held his gaze with him. He stepped forward with a raised hand, seeming ready to strike Jacob this time. When he lurched forward, Jacob, with surprising agility, dodged the man's merciless grasp, stepping just out of reach. In a second attempt, James closed the gap even quicker, snagging Jacob by the collar and putting him in a headlock. He tousled Jacob's hair, seeming to enjoy the rowdy nature of things. Just barely mustering the strength, Jacob found the means to squeeze himself out of James's nightmarish hold, and slipped away, sending himself tumbling backwards. The whole incident caused James to bellow with glee, which triggered him to look no so logically out at the water to reminisce about feelings unknown. A light breeze seemed to press against his rugged face, which broke him from his trance. He then looked to Jacob and smiled. "I'll take your griping as a compliment, my boy," responded James gleefully, while Jacob licked his wounds. "My true captaining days are long behind me, but I still take joy in the small things. I was a smuggler long ago, you see. Maybe started when I was closer to Nathaniel's age. And during those days, I used to sail goods through the channels of Magorma. Dangerous routes filled with pirates and naval fleets. I was a careless man back then, which could speak for my reckless actions now. Long story short, I've always held a desire to return to those good old days, but I'm compelled to live a simpler life now as a merchant. One with a more predictable routine, and a purse full of coin. But when all is said and done, adventure still calls to me, and is enough to keep this old man feeling young, and would turn a young man, such as yourself, into a hardened sailor worth their weight in gold." James moved in closer to Jacob, forcing the young man to confront him face to face once again. The angle that he captured from the sun cast a menacing shadow over Jacob, making the scene seem grim. With limited options, Jacob froze, waiting for James to make his next move. "Perhaps you should stay aboard the ship and grow yourself a fine pair of sea legs," spoke James menacingly, as he forced Jacob on the back step. "I could always use an extra pair of hands on deck to help clean up after a good day of drinking. Could even have you entertain the crew with a little song and dance from time to time, as well." The tension between the two men became chilling. A sense of dread was strewn across the young man's face, as he feared the idea of returning to the Willow. Collecting himself, Jacob summoned the courage to push back against James, forcing an extended arm against the burly man's chest. This afforded him the necessary space to pivot, giving him a more defensible posture. "Sorry to tell you this, James, but your little act won't work on me," shouted Jacob, with hands raised for a fight. "Your antics have grown distasteful as of late, and I refuse to yield to your whims. If threats are the best you can do, then you better come at me with a little more bite." James laughed once again. His hearty nature broke any tension that previously existed. He relaxed his posture, seeming to admire Jacob's bravery. The altercation already an afterthought in his mind, as he was quick to move past the engagement. "Atta boy, Jacob," cheered James. "It's always fun seeing you show a bit of backbone. It gives you the feel of a fighter, much like your brother. It will certainly come in handy in the days to come, as they will be long and difficult, so be ready." Suddenly, a short stubby man approached from the far side of the docks with documents in hand. In an awkward manner he placed himself just in earshot of James, as if the eavesdrop, which drew attention to him rather quickly. Both Nathaniel and Jacob, curious as to what the man wanted, huddled closer to James to listen in on the much obvious confrontation. "Excuse me, Mr. Varden," spoke the short man nervously, stammering a few of his words. "Yes?" "What is it?" inquired James, turning his full attention to the stubby man. The stubby man sighed in relief, which caused him to find his confidence. He stepped forward a little to remove himself from the bustling crowds of people around him. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Varden," continued the man. "My name is Jonathan Warner, though most call me Mr. Warner. I am the new chief logistics director that was hired on by your sister. I've been overseeing the transfer of goods within the limits of these docks for some time now. If you don't mind, I would appreciate your cooperation in identifying the goods and passengers aboard your vessel, and later on, I'll be sending my findings back to your sister for review." "Seems like a bunch of busy work I couldn't care less about," sighed James, seeming exhausted by the idea of work. "I'll have someone else aboard the ship go through this headache with you. In the meantime, I'll have these two lads with me accounted for so we can be on our merry way." James turned his attention to Nathaniel and Jacob, who stood close behind him. Mr. Warner got a brief look at them, then nodded in confirmation, returning his attention to James. "These two are very important visitors that will be seeing my sister soon," continued James. "I plan on showing them around a bit, but ultimately, they will be heading to our headquarters for work, so please excuse us." "Understood, Mr. Varden," responded Mr. Warner dutifully. "I see no problems here. I'll just have to make some notes and get a copy of your ledger." Mr. Warner then paused for a minute, looking from the documents in his hands back to James. "Though I find myself feeling rather confused, Mr. Varden, as I wasn't expecting any VIPs on our schedule," said Mr. Warner, scratching his head. "Are these new orders or am I losing track of myself?" "There's been a slight change in plans, but nothing to be concerned about," assured James. "These VIPs have only been moved up to accommodate a particular issue that needs to be discussed with my sister. Speaking of which, we should tend to that and go see her, as I wouldn't want to keep her waiting." Nodding in agreement, Mr. Warner produced a dossier, which he procured from his personal belongings. When ready, he pressed James to continue with an odd glance that said, "Whenever you're ready, sir." "The older brother is Nathaniel Turst, and the younger is Jacob Turst," spoke James while gesturing to each brother in kind. "Nathaniel, we're hoping, will be heading our security forces for this region, while Jacob will be helping my sister with her administrative duties. I personally will only be staying for a short while, so any records on my activities I'll leave up to you to write down." Mr. Warner took note of everything James had to say, and even scratched a few extra bits on the margins of the page he scribbled on. When finished, he handed the documents over to the trio to be signed. Once each of the three men had their turn at signing the dossier, it was handed back to Mr. Warner for review. After a few more crossed T's and dotted I's, Mr. Warner seemed ready to dismiss the trio. "Excellent. Everything seems ready to go, Mr. Varden," spoke Mr. Warner rather earnestly, while he delicately realigned his documents. "Please have your sister know that I'll have the rest of our matters here handled promptly. And seeing that our little situation here has now been handled, I wish the three of you good luck." With a smile, Mr. Warner quickly departed, leaving the group to their own devices. James then turned to the two brothers, seeming ready to move on himself. With a gleeful smile, he gestured to the town square at the far end of the docks. "Well, it's finally time to get going," announced James. "There's a market I wanted to show you straight ahead at the central plaza of town. I hope you're ready." The three men huddled together, each making their final preparations for the town ahead. With the brothers at his back, James took the lead, taking tremendous pride in doing so. "Just a heads up," hollered James over his shoulder. "This little tour through town, it's time sensitive, but it's still important that I squeeze it in before we find ourselves too busy. It's been a while since I've visited this market for myself, so passing through here is for my own benefit as well. Normally I wouldn't dare keep my poor sister waiting, but I simply can't help myself. I'll make it up to her if she ever finds out about our lollygagging." "While we're at it, James, if we are able to afford a spare moment, I would surely appreciate being shown a good time later in our schedule," interjected Nathaniel. "Spending time at sea can certainly take its toll on a man, so it would be nice to find ourselves some entertainment to help lift our spirits." James smiled at Nathaniel, seeming happy to oblige. "I can do that," assured James. "If fun is what you're after, then I know exactly what you need. There's this place I know where food is abundant and the women are divine. You'll love it. But for now, let us start with the market straight ahead. It would prove worthwhile to show you what this place is all about, as the movement of goods is central to this area, and could help catch you up on current affairs." "Then we shall follow your lead, James," responded Nathaniel. "Be our eyes and ears, and we shall pay careful attention along the way." "It's settled then," cheered James. "Let us continue onward, and in due time, we shall see it all." Jacob, who seemed the most open to James's invitation, seemed visibly excited. He narrowed his vision onto the market and rushed into the town ahead. Before he could branch off all on his own, however, James called out to him one last time. "Jacob," yelled James, signaling for the young man's attention. Jacob reluctantly turned around, looking as anxious as an excited pup made to endure a delayed treat. "Before you go off on your own, Jacob, I wanted to officially welcome you to Batu," announced James. "More specifically, welcome to Port Yulin, the town in which you'll be staying in for the next while. If I haven't made the point clear to you by now, you and your brother are now under the watchful eye of the Black Oak Trading Company, my family's business. It's a bit different here than back home in Cyandrium, but I hope you get comfortable all the same." With a wide smile, Jacob nodded at James, then continued onward into Port Yulin's market. As he continued his way further into town, he left James and Nathaniel far behind to engage in idle talk. Once in full view of the town, Jacob stopped at the edge of the central market and got a better look around. All around him was a tropical paradise. He felt the warmth of the town on his front and the coolness of the water on his back. As sweat accumulated on his brow, it rolled from his face to his neck and down his back, sending a chill down his spine that caused him to shudder. Despite that, his eyes bore witness to other things, such as colorful birds that traversed the skies like phoenixes, and foliage along a distant landscape that displayed untouched wilderness. He scanned over the central marketplace, taking in his surroundings, and noticed the grid-like structure of the town. The whole area spanned a few hundred acres in each direction, exemplifying the vast scale of the town as a burgeoning settlement. Complementary to this, the bulk of Port Yulin's architecture seemed recently constructed, and by Jacob's recollection, shared similar architectural designs to that of Cyandrium's own settlements, causing for an uncanny feeling. Despite this, Jacob seemed rather impressed with the way the town was developing, and looked to it in an inviting nature. The streets were wide, which were well suited for accommodating large swaths of visitors, and ripe for future projects. Quintessentially, Port Yulin's potential appeared limitless, and apply, as whoever's vanities were wrapped up in its success had a penchant for detail. As Jacob proceeded to narrow his vision, he observed more closely some of the broader details of his environment. Straining from the outside, he noticed a stark contrast in the way in which the town was laid out, giving him reason to believe that there was something peculiar about the town that was unspoken for. On its exterior, merchants were positioned far from the central plaza, seeming at odds with those at the heart of the town square within the central market. Within these outer perimeters, conditions were less savory, which made people averse to visiting these far-off areas. Regardless, the merchants stationed there attempted to sell their wares to straggling customers, luring them away into seedy locations that held the guise of a legitimate business. In the end, Jacob had suspicions that whatever was occurring within those outer limits was not something that concerned him. And so, he kept his mind focused on the more pleasing aspects of the town square, keeping his focus around there instead. Any matters of a complicated nature were indeed less evident within the heart of the market. Those within were afforded a greater degree of convenience, reaping the benefits of Port Eulan's desire for good business. The large crowds that gathered happily did so to partake in a variety of festivities of a thrilling nature. Under the reassurance of watchful eyes, vendors openly sported lavish goods, even offering games, music, and dancing for those looking to be entertained. Guardsmen, many of whom were equipped with an assortment of firearms, worked diligently to keep away any riffraff, which was a luxury reserved solely for the central market. In contrast, all the problems that plagued the outer edges of the town were kept far away from where Jacob was, marking a clear distinction between those who were forced to live between the margins of squalor and luxury. Unimmune to this reality, Jacob chose to live in luxury, a reality in which he naturally acclimated to. He was drawn into pursuing the activities of the central market, where people were most eccentric, finding great comfort in the bosom of baubles and trinkets. With so much going on, he took the time to further observe those in attendance. He witnessed wealth and poverty, those from distant shores, and a litany demographics all collected into a single setting. There were those who toiled in the hot sun, and those who profited off their labor. There were highbrow foreigners, off-duty soldiers, entertainers dressed in ornate costumes, dancing troupes, animal wranglers, artisans and merchants that peddled mysterious wares. Some people wore garments that were eccentric, fantastical, and well-made, while others wore more progressively plainer attire that could denote their social class as lower as one gradually made their way along. Collectively, it was a testament to how diverse the market was as an aggregate whole, which highlighted the granularity of Port Eulan as a settlement. In due time, Jacob took it upon himself to look past all these observations to finally visit a vendor for himself. The stall he decided to look at first was perhaps the busiest stall of them all, which made it rather difficult to see what was going on without bumping into other people. He eventually found himself a good place to examine the oddities of the day that caught everyone's attention. Items considered rare in many parts of the world, which included sweet-smelling perfumes, elegant jewels, ornate crafts, spices, silk, and elaborate artifacts that looked delicate to the touch. Viewing such oddities captivated the mind, which was apparently the case for everyone else as well. Not soon after taking a quick gander, James and Nathaniel had finally met up with Jacob. When they clued into their surroundings, they too were taken aback by everything that surrounded them. The crowds of people, the many fanciful goods, and even the growing wonder that enveloped the market itself. "Take it in, boys," announced James amidst the bustling of the crowd. "You see these items before you. The stalls that fill this square. This is my family's doing. My sister and I have brought people from near and far to do business here in Port Eulan. Be it the locals of Badu or customers from distant shores, we have invited all to come here for one common purpose. Capital. Be it found through status or wealth. We allow everyone the opportunity to purchase and sell the highest quality goods this side of the world has to offer. I often hear tales of those who buy from us taking their treasures home to show their friends and family and becoming the talk of their town. I think that's a good thing, quite honestly. Be it the local merchant or the curious traveler, we've offered people the opportunity to get a taste of luxuries beyond their wildest dreams." As he spoke, a boastful smile spread across James's face. He proudly admired his surroundings and relished in the energy of the market. He took particular joy in watching the two brothers enjoy themselves, seeming reassured in his efforts. "This is my family's legacy, my friends, and I am very proud of it," continued James. What we've done here will send shockwaves throughout the very core of Cyandrium, and every nation she touches. And we won't stop there, as we plan to open up new markets in different areas of the world beyond just Batu, and will continue to grow this company until it becomes the envy of the world. James walked up to Jacob, placing a meaty hand on the young man's shoulder. He received a momentary glance from Jacob, but he was quick to return his attention to what he was doing. Understand this, my friends, James rambled further. None of this was built overnight. It took blood, sweat and tears to accomplish what we have built here, and decades worth of investment from our benefactors to make this dream work. We arrived here in Batu over 12 years ago with a mission, and we've more than fulfilled that mission. And when we first got started here long ago, we made and kept 3 promises to ourselves. The first promise was to be fully transparent with our benefactors. Easier said than done, as our correspondence back to Cyandrium takes close to 3 months, causing the reports we send to appear outdated. We try our best on this front regardless. Our second promise is to guarantee our customers access to quality goods and services at affordable prices. Goods such as tools for metalworking, farming, and mining. Necessities such as food, medicine. Even some our best cotton-based textiles, which people here really seem to like. We also plan to introduce later additional goods such as linens, leathers, glass, and other such commodities that are expected to sell well here at a premium once they reach our markets. Then finally, the third promise we made was to never betray the trust of our most loyal allies. This one, we must skirt the line on from time to time, as the boundary between transparency and secrecy is a finicky matter that comes up from time to time. Fundamentally speaking, however, we do what we must to stay ahead of our competition, which means staying one step ahead of our friends and enemies alike. And what would you say stands as the company's core ambition at this current moment? Asked Nathaniel. There must be something attracting your family to Batu to deem the Black Oak Trading Company's efforts so far from Cyandrium to be worthwhile. Running an overseas trading post is an expensive endeavor, I would imagine, so what's your next plan moving forward? You're quite sharp, Nathaniel, spoke James gleefully. I'll start by saying that it serves us well to manage Port Yulan's markets, as we house overseas visitors, offer security for the region, and sell goods both here and in Cyandrium, but there is always more that can be done. The people of Cyandrium eat up whatever we serve them, and so does everyone else here. This alone can sustain us, as people love the jewels, the spices, the perfumes, and just about anything that keeps their imaginations running wild. What we plan to do now, however, is to move on to the next stage of our plan and push for even greater investments. For instance, company surveyors have found pockets of salt deposits not far from Port Yulan that could be sold the world over. We've also received reports of coal and diamond deposits in neighboring provinces that are undertapped and could easily double our revenue if proven a viable resource. With a bit of negotiating and some dedicated investment, such riches could send this company to new heights. It's only a matter of time before we begin to finalize such agreements, and the rest will be history. All truly fascinating stuff, James, spoke Nathaniel. I never imagined that your family's company could rouse such ambitions and prove yourselves so influential. I do have to ask, however, what do the local peoples here have to say about your plans for this region? Have they been open to allowing all this new activity happening around them? For a moment, James's expression turned sour, causing him to retreat. When Nathaniel took notice to James shying away, he stepped forward to approach him on the matter. Is something wrong, James? Asked Nathaniel with a look of concern on his face. Is there something we should know? It's a complicated matter, but nothing that's out of our control, responded James, seeming reluctant to speak further. My sister and I will give you the complete rundown over the situation during our meeting. For that reason, I shouldn't be delaying us any longer. We should really be seeing her now, though, I assure you, everything is being handled appropriately on our end, so don't let my mood bring you down. Enjoy yourself while you can, and when it comes time, we shall be open to you about everything as plainly as possible. Nathaniel studied James curiously. The sudden shift in tone was a bit off-putting for him, but forcing the matter appeared hazardous. Willing to look past the matter for the time being, Nathaniel positioned himself to meet James at his level, giving his friend some much-needed comfort. "If you insist on saving the matter for later, then I shall trust you, James," responded Nathaniel. "Though, if the matter is truly urgent, we better get ahead of these issues while we still can. Let us get to work, my friend, and put to rest these problems that ail you." Agreeing, James bucked up and shook hands with Nathaniel on the matter. With no other words to say, they looked to depart from the market, doing so with great haste. Though in their rush, they had left Jacob behind, causing him to barely take notice to their departure. As such, he reluctantly chose to follow after them, and was quick to escape after the two men, trailing far behind them while en route to their next destination. After a few turns down some empty streets and narrow corridors, it was revealed to Jacob the ever-expanding nature of Port Yulin as a settlement. With every turn he made, there was revealed to him the beginnings of new construction projects, the makings of towering structures, and completion of auspicious dwellings. Out of his own curiosity, he decided to peek between the crevices of some of these newly built structures, and what he saw within were the remnants of makeshift homes and hidden communities. With each alleyway he passed by, Jacob only saw more of the same. Down through one way and out the other, he could see families, large and small, huddled within, trying their best to survive amidst such newly erected opulence. Much further along, he couldn't help but be stopped by the sight of a frail little girl that chose to greet him instead of running away. She seemed far too young to be off on her own, especially to be approaching strangers. She spoke a language Jacob failed to understand, which he noted as likely being the local dialect. Unsure as to how he should react, Jacob just stood where he was and gave the little girl an awkward wave of the hand that he hoped would hurry her away. The little girl laughed, proving Jacob's efforts ineffective. He then garnered the attention of an elderly gentleman that was nearby, and didn't take kindly to his lingering. The man accosted Jacob for a distance, which startled the young man. Almost immediately, Jacob chose to quickly flee the scene, until he found himself back with James and Nathaniel. After taking a moment to catch his breath, Jacob looked to James for some answers. "James," called out Jacob, still a bit winded. "I saw some people living within the alleys back there. Is there nothing that can be done to assist them?" "Don't worry about it, Jacob," snapped James. The sudden response taking Jacob by surprise. James took a moment to catch himself, giving pause to what he said. "What I mean is, don't overthink such matters, Jacob. I know your sympathies are in the right place, but it is not your job to worry about such things. Instead, your focus should be on the company and its future growth. I know it will be hard to unsee what you just saw, but don't let it distract you. Our goal here is to make sure that the company thrives, and if helping people is something that you still wish to do, then it can be done once our affairs are in order. As my father once told me when I was no older than you are now, a rising tide raises all ships, but not all ships are made for deep waters. Therefore, the best we can do is to help others build stronger ships. So, word to the wise, Jacob, focus on your own affairs, and there will come a time when you can choose to help others. I guarantee you that you'll be better off for it if you take my father's advice as well." Judging by Jacob's growing discomfort, the proposition offered by James did not sit well with him in its entirety. He did not wish to make trouble for his host, however, so Jacob chose to keep silent. He refocused his mind on the matters at hand, trying his best to keep up with James and Nathaniel. Though with thoughts lingering, a pitted feeling was stuck within his stomach, staying with him the rest of the way forward. As the three men continued walking down the streets of Port Yulin, the mood felt a little more tense. The trio eventually happened upon a large building with a sign labeled the Black Oak Trading Company. At that moment James stopped to address the two brothers. "Okay, boys, listen up," announced James. "This is the Black Oak Trading Company's overseas headquarters. In here is where we conduct most of our overseas operations. Once inside, you will meet my sister, have a nice chat, then we'll be out of here before dinner time. I'll be honest with you, she can be a bit difficult to work with if you fail to make a good first impression, so stay sharp. With that being said, I trust that the two of you will do fine, so just try your best and keep things professional." James started rubbing the back of his neck, making clear that he was feeling a bit tense about the situation. Nathaniel stepped up to James, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder for comfort. "I didn't come all this way to Badu in order to screw things up, James," stated Nathaniel with an assured look on his face. "Let us get down to business and handle these problems together. Time is of the essence, so let us seize the moment while we still can." James calmed his nerves a little, giving Nathaniel a faint smile for reassurance. He then looked to Jacob to gauge his feelings as well. "And how about you, Jacob?" questioned James. "Do you feel the same way as your brother?" Jacob, still a bit distracted from the last incident, snapped to attention, his mind lingering on the feeling in his stomach. Regardless, he was quick to adapt his mood, and looked to James with a smile. "Of course, James," answered Jacob, seeming happy to oblige. "I made the trip too, and I'll be right behind you if you need me. Just lead the way." With that, James took a deep breath and exhaled heavily, his heavy chest making him seem more animated than usual. "Then let's get down to business, boys," announced James enthusiastically, turning to lead the way inside the building. Together, all three men entered the Black Oak Trading Company headquarters for the next stage of their journey. They would each begin a new chapter in their lives that would land them in a world far different from their own.